Welcome to Lifespan, the weekly podcast that digs up the dirt on the most outrageous, chaotic, and downright WTF lives ever lived. Forget what you learned in school. This is history's unhinged side. Tonight, we're embarking on a bizarre journey into the explosive and, frankly, baffling life of Billy the Kid, also known as Henry McCarty, William H. Bonney, maybe even other names, who knows? We'll be diving into our lifespan dossier, Billy the Kid, aka the Phantom Writer, to really unpack the WTF factor surrounding this, well, icon of the American Old West. Share, rate, and follow the show for more wild stories.
It's really something, isn't it? How this figure, whose actual documented life was pretty short and incredibly violent,
Yeah, very sharp.
has just become this huge legend. It's fertile ground for speculation. When we look at his story, it's not just, dates and events.
Right.
It's about how we've projected ideas about the West, justice, rebellion, all onto him. It says a lot about how we tell stories, I think.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The Wild West. We think cowboys, sunsets, maybe John Wayne.
Mm-hmm. The romantic version?
But our dossier paints a very different picture of the New Mexico territory in the 1870s. It sounds less romantic, more like a tinderbox.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
Forget the sweeping vistas for a second. Think land grabs, rampant cattle rustling,
Okay.
really deep ethnic tensions, Anglo versus Hispanic communities.
Yeah.
Plus you throw in corrupt officials, warring business factions. It was messy, really messy.
So not exactly a peaceful place for a young guy to grow up.
Not at all. And that environment, it's absolutely key to understanding how someone like Billy, whatever name he was using then, how his life took the path it did.
It wasn't just him being inherently bad then.
Well, probably not just that. The whole social structure was, fraying at the edges. Law was flimsy. Loyalties shifted constantly. Opportunity and extreme danger were basically neighbors.
And the real flashpoint seems to have been this thing called the Lincoln County War. Now, this wasn't minor. It was a serious economic conflict, right?
Oh, yeah. Full on. You had this established group, the House. There was Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan versus the newcomers, John Tunstall and Alexander McSween.
And Billy, William H. Bonney at this point, he gets tied up with Tunstall.
He did. The dossier suggests Billy saw Tunstall as a kind of mentor, maybe a father figure even.
That makes sense. In that chaotic world, finding someone like that.
Exactly. Someone offering guidance, maybe a bit of stability, belonging. It would have been huge for a young man.
So when Tunstall gets ambushed and murdered in February 1878, that's the trigger.
That's the spark that lights the fuse. Absolutely. It wasn't just losing a boss. It felt personal, deeply personal for Billy. And that seems to be what really launched him on this path of revenge.
Okay, so revenge. He becomes one of the regulators. Our dossier mentions they were actually deputized.
Yeah, technically, by the McSween faction's Justice of the Peace. But let's be real, it sounds more like a sanctioned vigilante group.
Right. Not exactly impartial justice, more like tit for tat.
Pretty much. And the violence just spiraled. Ambush after ambush, shootouts, it all built up to the Battle of Lincoln. 5 days of intense fighting in the town itself.
5 days. Wow.
Yeah, total chaos. Any semblance of real authority just collapsed.
And it's this chaos, this very public, brutal fighting that throws Billy into the spotlight.
That's it. He wasn't just another gunslinger anymore. He was a face, a key player in this very messy, very public war. Which, makes you wonder, how much were his later actions just reactions, responses to the violence he was surrounded by?
It's a blurry line, isn't it? Because the reaction back east, reading about it in the papers, it was immediate. Panic, fascination.
Oh, instant legend making. The newspapers just ate it up. Sensational stories,
And they paint it in both ways, like a monster and a hero.
Exactly. This bloodthirsty demon on one hand and this kind of prairie Robin Hood on the other. Total opposites.
Then, 1881, Pat Garrett catches up to him, kills him. But even that isn't straightforward.
No, not at all. The circumstances. Shot in a dark room. Was he even armed? Questions started swirling immediately.
And Garrett himself helps shape the story afterwards.
Hugely influential. He co-authored this book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. Now, authentic might be a stretch.
Probably.
It definitely boosted Garrett's image and cemented his version of events. Plus, you have the whole political mess swirling around the Lincoln County War.
Right. The dossier mentioned questionable pardons. Governor Lew Wallace.
Yeah, Lew Wallace, famous for writing Ben-Hur, ironically. He apparently promised Billy a pardon if he testified, but it never really panned out. Another layer of betrayal, maybe, cover-ups. It was tangled.
So this local conflict blows up into a national sensation, and Billy the Kid becomes more than just a person.
He becomes a myth, a symbol. He's transcended history. Really. He embodies all these conflicting ideas we have about the West.
The misunderstood kid, the cold killer, the rebel against the corrupt system.
All of it. He's maybe a footnote in some academic history texts, but in folklore, pop culture, he's a giant.
Which brings us perfectly to the biggest WTF of all, maybe, the theories about his death. Or his supposed death.
Right. Did he actually die that night in Pete Maxwell's bedroom? That's the million-dollar question that just won't go away.
The official story, Garrett's story, is pretty dramatic. Tracks him to Fort Sumner, sneaks into a dark room.
Here's someone ask Keenaz, who is it in the dark?
And Garrett fires twice. Billy's dead. End of story. Or is it?
Well, that version has always had its doubters. But the skepticism really hit critical mass in the 1940s.
With Brushy Bill Roberts.
Exactly. This old guy in Hiko, Texas, suddenly claims, hold on, I'm Billy the Kid. Garrett shot the wrong man. I escaped.
Wow. Decades later.
Decades later. And he wasn't just whispering it. He actually petitioned the governor of New Mexico for that pardon Lew Wallace had promised.
Get out of here. He asked for the pardon.
He did. It's an incredible story in itself. And, some people found his claim compelling.
What was the evidence he offered? Our dossier mentions a few things.
Well, he seemed to know a lot of intimate details about Billy's life, the Lincoln County War. Stuff maybe not everyone would know. There were stories he could slip out of handcuffs like Billy supposedly could. And some people, including his main supporter, William Morrison, looked at old photos and said, yeah, that's him.
But the historians weren't buying it?
Overwhelmingly skeptical. For good reason, really. There are major inconsistencies in Brushy Bill's timeline compared to Billy's.
Like what?
Well, for starters, official records, like a census record and family Bible, point to an Ollie Roberts being born quite a bit later than Billy.
That's a problem.
A big one. And critics argue he could have learned all those intimate details from books or talking to people over the years. The photo comparisons, honestly, they're really subjective, inconclusive at best.
And what about the literacy thing? Our dossier flags that.
Crucial point. We know Billy the Kid could read and write. We have his letters to Governor Wallace.
Okay.
Brushy Bill Roberts. Reportedly illiterate. That's a massive discrepancy.
Yeah, that's hard to explain away. And then his pardon hearing, it didn't end well.
No, it's quite dramatic. He apparently got flustered, maybe overwhelmed by the questions and the pressure, collapsed during the proceedings, and died shortly after.
So a dramatic end, but not exactly proof he was Billy.
For most historians, no. Not nearly enough credible evidence.
But people still believe the Brushy Bill story. Why?
I think, as the dossier suggests, it taps into something powerful. That fantasy of the outlaw cheating death, outsmarting everyone.
The ultimate escape.
Exactly. And Garrett's own account, being in a dark room, the quick shots, it leaves just enough ambiguity, enough wiggle room for people to say, well, maybe. It's a more romantic ending than just getting shot down.
That appeal of the better story. It's
Yeah.
strong.
It really is. And Brushy Bill wasn't the only claim. The dossier mentions a John Miller back in the 1930s saying similar things.
Another claimant.
Yep. And then there's the whole debate about how many people Billy actually killed. The legend says 21, one for each year of his life.
Right, I've heard that.
But historians who've dug into it, they usually land somewhere between 4 and 9. Still a killer, no doubt, but maybe not the hyper-lethal figure of legend.
4 to 9 is still significant, especially for someone so young. The kid part is accurate.
Definitely. That kill count probably got inflated by the same sensationalism that built his legend in the first place. The lower number makes him maybe a bit more human, a product of extreme circumstances, but still undeniably violent.
So whether he died in 81 or lived to be an old man in Texas, his impact is huge.
Undeniable. The dossier calls it pop culture overload, and that feels right. Films, songs, books.
Oh, yeah. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Young Guns. Those are big ones.
Bob Dylan, Bon Jovi's Blaze of Glory.
Yeah.
Countless novels, comics, TV shows. He's everywhere.
He's become this archetype, hasn't he? Youth, rebellion, anti-authoritarianism that romanticized Western violence.
The original bad boy, in a way. He's influenced so many characters we see even now.
And people still visit the places associated with him, Lincoln, Fort Sumner.
Absolutely. There are major tourist spots in New Mexico now. Ground zero for the Billy the Kid story. But even his grave, it's contested. Headstone stolen multiple times.
Seriously?
Yeah. And there's still talk, debates about digging up remains for DNA testing to try and settle the Brushy Bill or John Miller questions. The story just refuses to lie down quietly.
It's like the mystery itself keeps him alive, and his fame comes and goes in waves.
Seems like it. As the dossier notes, you had the Brushy Bill era reigniting interest. Then the Young Guns movies brought him to a whole new generation. He gets rediscovered.
Okay, let's dig into some of those deep cuts the dossier mentions, the trivia, the weird details, like all the names he used.
Right. Henry McCarty seems to be his birth name. Then Henry Antrim, after his stepfather. Then William H. Bonney, which is the name he used most during his outlaw days. And finally, the nickname Billy the Kid.
Quite the collection. Adds to the mystery, doesn't it? Harder to pin him down. Billy the Kid probably just stuck thanks to the newspapers.
Or most likely. It was catchy, memorable, perfect for headlines.
And the famous photo of the tintype. The only confirmed photo.
That's the one. And the big misconception our dossier highlights, him being left-handed.
Oh, yeah. I always pictured him as a lefty.
Common mistake. It's because tintypes are reversed images, like looking in a mirror. If you look closely, the rifle he's holding is a right-handed model Winchester. His pistol is on his left hip, but that was common for right-handers drawing crossbody.
Huh. So he was probably right-handed, but the lefty myth persists.
It does. It's a more romantic image, maybe? The southpaw gunslinger. It just stuck, even though the evidence points the other way.
A classic case of legend trumping fact.
Totally. And then there's the Great Escape. Lincoln County Courthouse, April 1881. This is pure Hollywood.
Right, he'd just been sentenced to hang? How did he pull it off?
Details are a bit murky, which helps the legend, of course. But somehow he got hold of a gun smuggled into the jail. Or maybe found one unsecured.
Okay.
He shoots Deputy James Bell on the stairs. Then he grabs a shotgun, famously. Deputy Bob Ollinger's own shotgun waits for Ollinger to come running when he hears the shot.
Oh, wow.
Calls down to him something like, "Hello, Bob," and shoots him too. Then he supposedly breaks the shotgun over the railing, gets on a horse, and rides out of town, maybe even singing.
That's incredibly brazen, singing as he rides away.
The singing might be embellishment, but the escape itself, audacious.
Yeah.
It cemented that image of him as someone who just defied authority at every turn.
And despite this rough life, he could read and write.
Yep. The letters to Governor Wallace prove it. It shows, a level of intelligence, maybe even a grasp of the legal situation he was in. Definitely contradicts the stereotype of the purely brutish, uneducated outlaw.
It adds another layer. Makes him more complex than just a trigger finger.
For sure. Which leads to that whole charisma question. People who knew him, even enemies, sometimes described him as charming, witty, friendly.
But also deadly.
Right. That weird combination. Was he a sociopath, just a product of his incredibly violent times, or just trying to survive? It's hard to say.
And those last words, ¿Quién es?
Well, Garrett's account is the only source for that. Plausible? Sure, asking who's there in a dark room makes sense. Embellished for dramatic effect after the fact. Also entirely possible.
So much uncertainty around him.
That's the core of it. Violence, charm, legend, unanswered questions. Was he a ruthless killer? Victim of circumstance? Folk hero who faked his death? Maybe all of the above, in a way.
The complexity is what keeps us talking about him, probably, over 140 years later.
Absolutely. His story just keeps provoking debate.
Well, if this bizarre journey has got you hooked, we've got plenty more for you in our curated curiosity cabinet.
Yeah, there are some great books. Robert Utley's Billy the Kid, A Short and Violent Life is a standard. Mark Lee Gardner's To Hell on a Fast Horse is excellent, too.
And you have to read Pat Garrett's The Authentic Life, even if you take it with a grain of salt. Michael Wallace's The Endless Ride is another good one.
We've also got links to documentaries, video essays, websites like New Mexico Historic Sites, Legends of America, the Billy the Kid Outlaw Gang site.
Plus virtual tours of Lincoln and the Fort Sumner Museum. Lots to explore.
So keep digging into the unhinged side of history with us. And maybe think about this. If Billy did manage to vanish, who else might have pulled off a similar trick? What other historical endings might not be the end at all?
Ooh, that's a fun thought to leave people with. A fascinating rabbit hole.
Definitely gives you pause, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the truly bizarre journey of Billy the Kid on Lifespan. We'll catch you next time for another look at history's most unbelievable lives.